feel free
I will.
to
I will.
stop me down, and because I think we should move forward and
Yeah.
maybe just go back and hit.
Talk a second. I want to make sure I have your recording,
Okay.
your microphone.
So, what I also need you to do is, I know you talked about driving out with Marilyn, but you never used her name. So we'll leave a sentence, like I had a really good friend named Marilyn, and we drove. I just
Okay.
need you to.
I had,
Well, okay.
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 You good?
Good. Yeah.
Okay. So.
So I had many college friends, sorority sisters mostly, and we had a senior suite in the sorority house. And Marilyn was a sorority sister of mine who I shared the senior suite with. And when it came time to leave your hometown, because don't forget we were already both 2 years out of college, and she was not married. So I said, and she lived in Indianapolis, close by, let's drive to California. And she was game for it right away. And so we packed up the car and off we went, like Thelma and Louise, driving our way. And we used, triptychs, I think. We had maps. It wasn't like connect yourself to the smartphone and it'll give you directions. So we had triptychs and we followed our way all the way out to LA, and we spent a few days in LA and then drove on to San Francisco, and that's where we stayed for six to 8 months.
You have pictures of all this, I assume.
Probably, I have, when you're 80 years old, you've acquired a few pictures
Yeah, boy.
in your life.
Shoot, I've never taken so many pictures as the last 6 years when I adopted Bella as I
Yeah.
have my entire life. That's the truth. Okay, so just give me one sentence. So I drove out to San Francisco with my really good friend Marilyn.
So I drove out to San Francisco with my very good friend Marilyn from Indianapolis.
Perfect. Tell me, okay, so you told me how Jerry asked you to marry him. Tell me, when did you get married, and tell me about your wedding day.
We got married when Jerry was able to.
Let me just. Jerry and I got.
Jerry and I got married when he was able to get vacation time at his internship, and it turned out to be in March. He got 2 weeks vacation, and we planned our wedding around that date. He came home probably 2 days before the wedding itself, did our blood test, did all of those things, and got married on a Sunday at 4:30 in the afternoon at a hotel in downtown Cincinnati. It was, my friends had babies by then. They couldn't make the wedding. It was a big family wedding, few friends because they were tied up with other things by then. And we left the next day for Spain and Portugal. And we were able to spend 2 weeks traveling around Spain and Portugal and return to Manhattan, where Jerry had rented an apartment for us and lived there until basically the end of June. He was due out in California July 1. And he chose California because I was so insistent that it was just the best place in the world to be, and we never looked back. We came out here, we left both families in Cincinnati, and this is where we are, over 50 years later.
Did you give me your wedding date?
We were married on March 10th, 1963.
I had just turned 3.
And I was, I think, 25 at the time, something around that.
Okay. Tell me about Jerry. Who is he?
As it turns out, they say you marry someone that lives within 5 miles of you. Jerry certainly lived within 5 miles of me. But he was 2 years older. I was busy dating. He was involved with a woman as well, a girl. And we knew each other and went out maybe twice during high school. He was always very popular. He was president of his fraternity. He was president of student council. Very smart, went on to Harvard College, undergrad. And he was fun. I mean, he didn't have as many experiences as I was as I had during those years of growing up in Cincinnati, but he had a different experience. And because we knew each other, it wasn't a blind date sort of thing. We had so much in common because of our high school background and just growing up in Cincinnati. And he's a lot more serious than I am. He kind of is not as outgoing as I am, but maybe men aren't as outgoing as women anyway. But I appreciated his intellectual capabilities, and it worked out well, and I never looked back. I don't tend to look back. You know, I'm not the kind of person that's feeling sorry and why didn't I and I should have, and you know, I usually know what choices I'm making, and I would say they usually turn out good.
Good for you. That's really cool. Very important. Tell me about the day you found out you were going to be a mom.
Well, as I told you, when Jerry and I got married, we came out to California. He was a resident by then, and I was working at Pacific Telephone, which was in Culver City. And I was in the business office because it took too long to get recertified in California as a teacher. So rather than that, I just went to work in the business office in Culver City. And they had a rule, which I wasn't aware of, that if you were to get pregnant, you must stop working when you're 7 months pregnant, which at the time I didn't pay any attention to. And we had a little red Fiat, four-door Fiat, and I would drop Jerry off at the hospital in the morning, or he would get a ride because we just lived in Brentwood in an apartment. And I'd go to Culver City and either pick him up after work or he would find a way home. And he may have even, no, I don't think he had a bicycle, but he could have certainly even walked. It was that close. And we lived off of Barrington in Brentwood with a little apartment, a one-bedroom furnished apartment. And when I got pregnant, I didn't know I was pregnant except for the fact that I was sick every morning. Very sick, and I just, you know, and finally I went to the doctor of a friend of mine who was using the same doctor, and, you know, he told me I was pregnant, which by then wasn't surprising because I couldn't eat anything in the morning and eat crackers and more crackers and more crackers, which didn't do any good. But after 3 months, you're over that and onward and upward. And Jerry was very busy as a doctor. He was working every day and sometimes into the evening hours. And when I got to be 7 months pregnant, my supervisor said that she wanted me to fill out a piece of paper when could I sign? And I said, well, let me take it home and read it, and, you know, I'll bring it back tomorrow. And I took it home and I read it, and it said that I agreed to stop work after 7 months in my pregnancy. And I said to Jerry, that seems silly. There's nothing wrong with me. I'm fine. So I decided not to sign it and went back to work the next morning, and she said, oh, do you have that paper? And I said, yeah, here it is. And I gave it to her. She said, well, you didn't sign it. I said, no, I'm not going to sign it. I said, because I think I can continue to work. There's nothing wrong with me. I feel good, and I walk around, and I'm fine. And the next thing I knew, I got called into the real supervisor's office, and he sat me down, and he said, you know, this is the custom of Pacific Bell, and this is what we do, and, you know, we're asking that you sign it. And I said, I'm not going to sign it. So that was that. They let me go, and I stayed at work, I don't know, maybe another 2 weeks. I don't know what it was. And as a result, as it turned out, I wasn't aware, but it was the reason that I could collect unemployment because I had not quit. I was actually fired. So it worked out okay. I learned a lesson. And, you know, to this day, I don't have any regrets.
Illegal, what they did.
Well, I don't think it was unusual for that time. I think that many companies probably did not want to take the responsibility of pregnant people falling or bumping into things or having problems. And so they just thought if they terminated your work at that time, that that was the way that they could then hire somebody who wasn't pregnant.
What lesson did you learn?
What lesson did I learn by that? I would say that I learned that if you really believe in something, that you should stick with it. You know, it wasn't going to get me in any trouble. I had a job. I wasn't going to lose my job. And I really didn't know where it was going to take me. I just knew that that was something that I didn't have to sign because I did not agree with what it said.
It's very interesting. I think most people would have been intimidated.
I'm sure that most people signed it, and you know that's why they still had it, because that was the way that they could terminate people's employment without having to have it rub off on the company in any way where they would have to pay you.
Jonathan, we don't see her pillow behind her, do we?
No, we're above that.
Okay, great. So tell me about having your first child.
So my first child was due in September, and I was working, and you know, I was the last 2 months I was footloose and fancy free. I do remember that John Kennedy died, I believe, when I was on my way to see my doctor when I was pregnant. This is what my recollection. And I got off the bus at Roxbury in Wilshire, where my doctor was, and all of the stores had draped pictures of John Kennedy. Nothing was. It may have been after my son was born that he died, but I do remember that was just the worst week that I think anyone that was alive at that time could have ever dreamed could have happened. I mean, it was before Martin Luther King, and it was catastrophic. There wasn't a dry eye in California, I'm sure, because everybody it was gloomy and just terrible. Television coverage was 24/7, and it really had a big impact on all of us, I think. I remember I was working at Pacific Bell in Culver City when I heard it on the television, and I called my friend who had gotten us our apartment, and I said, "Did you hear the news?" And she was outside on the steps with her 2 kids making sure that they were okay, and she hadn't heard anything. And of course, once you heard it, you didn't leave TV for hours. It just was on and on and on and on. And Douglas obviously was not born yet, because I had probably had a maternity appointment, and that's what I recall. So that took up a long time when I was waiting to deliver. You know, I was pregnant because I was still working at the time, so I obviously was pregnant. And my son was born at UCLA, which wasn't far away. I went into labor late at night and delivered late at night, and stayed in the hospital. My mother and grandmother came out from Ohio to be here when the baby was born. It was my mother's first grandchild. My grandmother already had great-grandchildren. They stayed for 6 weeks and helped me. Jerry would come home from the hospital at lunchtime to see Douglas, and we had friends that had babies who were also residents at the hospital. And it was a very carefree existence at the time. You know, I wasn't hounded by family. We were on our own to do as we wanted to do, and we did very well. You know, everybody says, "Oh, you have to be near your family, and you're going to need help, and you're going to need." We didn't have help. We didn't have babysitters. we just managed. You just manage when you have to. We weren't making much money at all. We would take Douglas with us wherever we went. I don't think we ever had a babysitter. Well, we lived there until he was 6 months old. And then we moved to Beverly Glen, and we probably had a few sitters then. He was already, he was near almost a year old when we moved, actually. But coming to California made just a tremendous difference in my life. What we left behind, you know, the cold weather, the dark, dreary days. You just come out here and you're look at life entirely differently. There's no question about that. We never looked back. When it came time to decide, is this where we really want to stay and spend time? I don't think we ever really thought that we'd ever go back to Ohio. And both of our families were in the same city. So it was very difficult to say no to them, but it was just too nice out here.
I want to just go back one step. You said that, and I don't want to forget about this, you said you invited Kennedy to your wedding.
Oh, yeah. You know, when I got married, I had already been in probably 7 or 8 weddings of my friends. So it wasn't as big a deal to me as it was to them. It was just something like, it was almost, you know, a prescription that everybody went through. And by the time it came to your turn, you had done it so many times that it wasn't the thrill that you always thought about when you were maybe in high school. And so I did things a little bit different than most brides. At the time, I remember telling my mother that I didn't want black ink on the invitation. I wanted dark gray ink because everybody had black ink. So she thought I was crazy, but she got gray ink, made sure that there was gray ink. And I didn't carry a bouquet. I carried 1 rose. And I had a rose on my veil. And I also invited John Kennedy, who was President of the United States, and his wife, to my wedding. Of course, never expecting them to come, but I thought, who knows, they could. So I invited them, and obviously they did not come, but they sent us a nice card saying that they regretted that they were unable to attend. And when he died, I looked for that card and got it framed with the envelope that it came in, and it's hanging in my hall today.
I think we should probably stop. Was it too bad? Do I have to get that again?